And I love teaching because it supports the art making practice. It's like you're never off duty as an artist.
Welcome to Artists in Offices, a podcast that explores, through interviews with working artists, the idea that the work you do for pay supports the work you do for love. Or does it? I'm your host, Rebecca Bird Grigsby, visual artist, crafty generalist, and dance enthusiast. Having quit my full-time day job in 2017, I'm currently a recovering artist in offices, rebooting my studio practice while trying to figure out my next career move. Each episode of this podcast explores the perspective of an individual artist juggling their creative practice with their day job. In episode 6, I talked to Christopher Thomas Ford, a Los Angeles area artist who works part-time as a museum preparator's assistant.
My name's Chris Ford. I'm in Long Beach, California. I grew up in Brockton, Mass., which is just south of Boston. I work as a preparator's assistant at a contemporary art museum in Los Angeles. I'm in my late 30s. I have to say, when I was younger, I would always say, well, I'm an artist, and then I've had several different types of jobs, day jobs, and I put that second, but it just got tiresome because, people ask, okay, what do you really do? So I always start with the day job first. And then I say, well, and then they're like, oh, are you an artist too? And then I go, yeah. I don't know what caused that change, because I'll say I'm a preparator's assistant, or, back when I was teaching, I would say I'm a professor at such and such college, and,
I can sympathize with you sort of getting tired of explaining yourself to people who might not understand that dual life. So tell me about you mentioned you grew up in Brockton, Massachusetts. Tell me about your path to art. Was being an artist something that you wanted to do from an early age?
Yes, 100%. I think, my father was an artist when he was younger, before he had kids. He wasn't practicing art by the time my parents had 3 kids by the time the kids came around. But there was a lot of art books, art supplies everywhere. And it was just something that was always around when I was a kid. So I was just always immersed in it. And I'm one of 3 brothers, and all 3 of us were kind of in that, always had some sort of interest in art and drawing and stuff like that. I studied graphic design, which sounds weird. And in high school, I went to a vocational school. 1 week, kind of regular high school with math, calculus, social studies, English. And then the next week you'd be in your shop, or, and so some students were doing carpentry or auto body repair, and I was in the graphic design, with working with Photoshop and all those type of things. And that was great because it got me to, I was told early on by the teacher the instructor in that, in the graphic design program at the school is well, most graphic design firms don't hire people out of high school. He's like, you got to go to an art school. And I was like, what's an art school? And I started collecting brochures from art schools. And so I was putting together a portfolio to apply to art schools around the area. And I ended up going to what's now called the Lesley College of Art and Design. Used to be known as the Art Institute of Boston. And that's where I got my undergrad degree. Then went off to the museum school a few years after that.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about, as we're moving through your sort of formal training as an artist and designer, some of your past jobs that may have been sprinkled out throughout that?
Even though I said I was going to go to art school, when I was pitching myself to art schools, when I was 17, I was saying I wanted to be a graphic designer, but I really wasn't interested in doing that.
I'm just curious if you learned that from experience. Did you do that as a job for a while, or did you just have a feeling that you wouldn't want to do that full time?
Yeah, I've had a feeling I didn't want to do that for full time. I think there was a couple of guest speakers that came to the program. Also, there was a family member, like a distant cousin, that was a graphic designer. And I think one of my older brother's friends was a graphic designer. My older brother's significantly older than me. So, people that had like real jobs, his friends and stuff like that. And what they were doing didn't appeal to me. I thought they were like interesting, like very skilled and I admired their like what they could do like skill wise, but like designing pamphlets for like, I don't know, grocery stores and stuff like that it didn't appeal to me. I mean, there's a lot, I gotta say, there's a lot of lack of knowledge too, that being 17, I didn't really know that much. So I was like, that seems kind of lame. But now that I look, I kind of enjoy looking at graphic design work and like really accomplished graphic designers and like interesting things that they can do. But back then, no. So I got into illustration in college, which was good. Illustration is like somewhere like halfway between fine artist and halfway between graphic designer. And they give you exposure to a lot of different techniques and materials, where I think in fine arts you start to get siloed into like sculpture, ceramics, or painting, or printmaking. And like in illustration, you'll work on each of, not on ceramics, of course, but like you do like something, you'll do watercolor, oil painting, acrylic, digital media, maybe even touch on some animation, like from months to months to months. So it was kind of like like getting access to a wide variety of technical education. So, illustration techniques are, illustration critique, at least in the school I went to, it was kind of funny, like contrasting it to like later on crits in grad school. It's sort of very straightforward in illustration. It's like, that elbow doesn't look right, fix it. Or
yeah.
Like, that's this doesn't look good. Got to do it again,
Right. And
it's like,
straightforward is definitely not the way I would describe grad school critiques.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So thinking back on it now, I really enjoyed that, because it was definitely very formal and maybe even a little conservative, but it's you get a solid technical foundation. And I thought that was, it's something that I rely on now,
So was that like your major?
That was my,
as an undergrad?
That was my major as an undergrad.
And then did you go straight from there into the post-bac program at museum school?
Actually, no. I was doing a work study job in the art history library. I was kind of helping out what was then called the slide library, but it would later become like the digital image library, which is basically where if I don't know how, maybe you probably know, but young listeners, they used to have 35 millimeter slides.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
I remember going to the slide library when I worked as an undergrad research assistant for a professor as she was putting together a new course. And yeah, so this is definitely, I mean, I'm a little bit older than you, but so yeah, anybody probably younger than you will not know what we're talking about. But there were once slides. It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, it's basically an analog like image collection for the art history. So if you're in a lecture for an art history class, the images you saw were like held in a library. That sounds so arcane now. So I started working in there, and I actually got, because the slide librarian, I think, didn't want to, because it was such a physically taxing thing. I was in charge of doing like the copy stand photography. So I got like photography chops doing that. And like soon after I graduated, I was working at an artist supply store, and that slide librarian retired, and there was another staff person retired in the same library, and they were like suddenly like had 75% of their staff gone. And both of the retiring staff members recommended me to fill in. So I got that job less than a year out of college. So I was like in charge of that slide library, and I brought it into I did the digitization project, so it was no longer an analog collection. So I was there for, I want to say about 5-6 years doing that. And then I went to the post-bac because I was testing it out because I wanted to thinking about teaching. Again, it sounds so long ago. The job I was doing in that library, because of the digitization and all these things going on, a lot of the colleges around like 2007, 2008, right when that economic downturn hit, were getting rid of that position. So I was like, well, I have to kind of figure something out, I can't do this forever because it's not this isn't going to be a job in 5 years,
You could see the wave coming.
Yeah, I could see the wave coming because I was making pretty decent money. I was living in Boston. I had my own apartment, I was in my 20s. That was like unheard of, and I didn't have roommates,
I'm curious if you were making your own artwork at that time?
I was. I started, like I said, I had illustration training, but through working with the art historians, like in my day-to-day job, I got exposure to a lot of what was going on in fine art and contemporary art. And, like that got me going to shows a lot more in Boston and New York. And then I started like making less illustration type stuff and more fine art stuff. And I even had a couple of shows between grad school and between undergrad and grad school, and then slowly put together a portfolio to apply to post-bac and grad programs around.
So you mentioned going to the post-bac program. Part of your motivation was an interest in teaching. Was that like kind of the main reason like that, and maybe wanting to get more into the kind of fine/contemporary art side of things?
Exactly. Yeah, that was definitely it. Because I really hadn't had. I knew the limits of what the education I had. I hadn't, even though I was like going to shows and stuff like that, I hadn't been in that fine art critique space or in that sort of dialogue with like other artists my own age, and like seeing, that type of the rigor of that type of discourse, and I knew I was lacking in that. And I think the post-bac program was like my tentative, like just like putting my foot in the water gently, because I kept my job while I was in the post-bac program.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I had to like have all my classes basically be on like Mondays and at night. And what I did is I had a bunch of unused vacation time, and I would like for a year, my employer let me take every Monday off.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
I sprinkled out not during the summertime, but during the academic year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great that you were able to do that, but that's a lot.
Yeah, it was.
Christopher and I continue discussing the post-bac program for several more minutes. Look for that bonus mini episode wherever you listen to the podcast. At this point in his formal training, Christopher put off going straight from the post-bac into the grad program at the museum school in Boston for personal reasons.
I just immediately started applying again that fall, winter, and got into more programs and, had more choices and ended up at SMFA.
Mm-hmm. So you chose SMFA after all? After all that.
Yeah, I think I was still, during this whole time, I still had my job. And even my first semester in grad school, 2009, I was still working full time. I had to resign my position because I just wasn't going. I was like, this isn't going to work. Yeah, I felt like I was tossing money away because I was like not able to fully participate in the program, and I was spending a lot of money on the program, but I wasn't, because I was just working so much, and I'd miss, all the great guest speakers or whatever special things were going on during the days I didn't have class, or the times I didn't have class. I would just show up for my class and then, or for whatever thing I could, and creatively use my vacation time for my work.
Yeah. So you did that for about a semester before quitting your job? So did you work? Because I know when I was at museum school the first year, I worked in like retail and part-time, but even that was, challenging to feel like I was taking advantage of the graduate program. And then I lived in Dorchester, so getting to and from places took a while. Yeah. But then my second year, I'm trying to remember now if it was the second year or if it was even just that second semester, I was able to get like a TA, I think 1 or 2 TA-ships. And, so I was able to cobble together, I still needed to work to pay rent and stuff, but I was able to cobble together things that were happening like on campus and were more related to what I thought I wanted to do. So were you able to do that eventually? Yeah. Yes. What was your work experience like after that?
Thankfully, I had some money saved up. So I was able to float for a little bit, and then I got work study jobs, and then eventually TA-ships, and then like work study jobs in the library at SMFN. They're like, oh, you know how to do all this stuff. So I was able to keep everything together, paying rent, budgeting. That was something too, like saving money, downsizing. I had to and move in with other people, and honestly, loans. I took out loans too to help cover the gaps.
Whether or not to go to grad school for art is a highly personal choice. As someone who has an MFA, I still feel like it was a useful way to spend that time and money. But if one of your reasons for going is to spend more time on your creative practice, it can be extremely frustrating to feel like a significant chunk of that time is spent cobbling together multiple part-time gigs and taking on even more student loan debt just to be able to afford to attend. So while you were at SMFA and, maybe in your undergraduate program as well, how did you feel professional practices was handled? Do you think it was effective? Would you do anything differently? Did it help prepare you for reality post-grad school?
I will say in the undergrad, I think it was handled pretty well. They were I think also that same muscle or that matter-of-factness that they use, because illustrators, and that's what I got my degree in. And it's not their, they didn't tell me, you're an artist, you should go do this. But they always warned us that like this is a freelance gig, it's going to take you a while to get a portfolio together and enough clients that will like regularly call you and like give you work. So you have to figure something else out too. A lot of people, work at an artist supply store or wait tables or, bartend, something like that. That's just common. That was like, I remember that was just in the common thing. And like, I remember my instructors from the illustration department, when I got that job, in the library, they were like, good job. Yeah, that's great. This is perfect for you. You can do this during the day, work on your portfolio at night, and you're good to go. It's not, and the expectations for that were not like you get a bunch of jobs and you're a professional illustrator a year out. I have to say, like in the grad program, I was always thinking in the back of my mind when I was listening to like guest speakers and like instructors even, like I'm like, where is the money coming from? How are you affording the studio when you were where is this all coming together? And like a lot of it, I found out that a lot of them were they got teaching jobs right after they got their degree, because a lot of them were a generation or two older than me, and there were just less people with a master's degree out there. So you could, with maybe like not that much of an artist CV, like not that, not showing in that many galleries, not that many shows, but you could walk into, pretty steady teaching gig at a college and with your master's degree and build, and like teach a couple classes a week, and then you could afford a studio, and then you could get into these shows and stuff like that on the side, But I mean, I was really lucky to get like that, to get the teaching experience the teaching jobs that I did get out of grad school. But that was not the case for many people. I mean, it's like, there were just no jobs out there for teachers. And
yeah, especially in that time. Like, I mean, I graduated in 2008. I finished up my postgrad teaching fellowship. And of course, the economy wasn't doing well either. So it's hard to say if the economy was doing well, had things been different for me and some of my fellow graduates. But I also feel like this is like a common kind of thread that's coming up. I think a lot of us go to grad school because we want to, further our art practice, but we also know that the terminal degree is necessary for teaching at the college level. And I think that just generationally doesn't happen as often. And the people that I know that are teaching from my group, 10 years later, were willing and able to go literally like anywhere that the teaching jobs were. So if you were at all picky or had roots anywhere, it probably wasn't going to happen for you.
Exactly. That's exactly my experience. So there was like two types of groups of people that went into teaching. And I love teaching because it supports the art making practice. It's like you're never off duty as an artist when you're teaching. It's if you're teaching art, I should say, so you're thinking about art making and you're trying to verbalize it to a student. And so you're always kind of thinking and translating at the same time, like, how can I make this more palatable to somebody younger, less experienced, or then you're trying to translate, trying to understand what they're trying to do too, so there's this constant give and take. And like, I found myself like, when I was teaching, like going into the studio, I was like, I'm just ready to go. I'm not tired. It's like I just got warmed up or something like that. Because I also went to my undergrad in Boston, I knew the teachers at Lesley, and like I would tell them like, oh, I'm doing this and that, and they're like, oh, why don't you just, we have an opening here, why don't you come on in here, like we get so-and-so's retired, that's how that's how adjunct teaching works. You rarely see a job posting or something like that. It's usually like this informal thing. You have to know somebody and they kind of get you in. But that's a place where I knew people, and I was a student there. I worked there.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting too. I think it also speaks to, like you said, I think that's definitely true, that it's those personal connections. But I think staying connected with that community obviously benefited you in the long run. So you ended up teaching after grad school at Lesley. And how long did you do that?
I did that for 2 years. And then my fiance, now wife, partner, got a teaching fellowship opportunity up in Vancouver, Canada. So
Christopher is married to Helena Shea, an artist I interviewed for this project. Look for episode 4 wherever you listen to the podcast.
I was still adjuncting, and during this time, I should say, I was also co-running an artist's studio and gallery space in Dorchester, because I was hoping to get from Lesley. They were, I was adjuncting, so it was like this semester to semester basis. And I remember approaching them when I was realizing that maybe there was an opportunity for Helena to go teach in Canada, but I wanted to be careful about this before we just like get up and move anywhere. And I wanted to know if I was going to be teaching again in the fall. I had great evaluations, got like a lot of good comments from the department heads and stuff like that. But the department heads were retiring, and they weren't getting back to me basically fast enough. I wanted to know, like, am I going to be teaching the same course load? There's always these like talks in the hallway, like maybe we'll give you another class, but I wanted things in writing, and I wanted something like written down, and I wasn't getting it. So I just, I was like, okay, we have to make a decision. And so I kind of gave up that teaching position. Actually got a good friend in line for that same job before I left. And then we moved to Canada for a year.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what did you do while you guys were in Canada?
That was pretty rough. So Helena was teaching, I want to say they kept her just below full time. Canada's great and amazing. So we got free healthcare. I was not allowed to work for a while. I had to get my work permit all squared away, and it was attached. I'm trying to remember the specifics of this, but it was attached to my wife's job. So if she was employed, then I could be employed. I remember that. Like, so if she like lost her job or was fired, like I couldn't work either. It was, and her work permit was only good for whatever the academic year. So it was hard for me to find a job. I was like, I can't, like, telling employers, I'm like, oh, and I think there was even a penalty they had to pay for like hiring a non-Canadian citizen. Yeah, it took me a while to find a job. I got a job with an art startup for a bit. They didn't pay me on time, so
I'm just curious, what is an art startup? This is an interesting.
Well, it was a little fuzzy on the details. It was this. I remember it was like this card that you would get, like an artist card, and you would get, if you were a customer, you would get special discounts on plays and theater stuff and like special exhibit openings. They were trying to get like different art sites around the city in Vancouver to grab on, and then people would buy the card, and you get basically like a discount to all these venues.
Yeah. Okay. So almost like a cultural.
Yeah.
No, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So it was and it was very early in the stages, and I remember, my job was to kind of go to these venues and basically sit at a desk and help people sign up for them and talk to them about the program. And I did a few of these, and I was still waiting to get paid. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to work out. And so I finally got paid for those a couple of months after I quit. And then I just worked, and by then I just got a job at Starbucks.
Mm-hmm. And were you able to continue your studio practice during this period?
Yeah, that was great. So we had a nice apartment in Vancouver. I think it's one of the more expensive places to live in Canada, but it's a lot cheaper to live there than, it was cheaper to live there than in Boston, and cheaper to live there than it is to live in LA or San Francisco. So we got a pretty good apartment, and we had an extra room, and we had a nice studio set up, and I got to work a lot out of there. It was good. Yeah, and then I took on a part-time job, weirdly enough, remotely working for another podcast, and I won't name plug it, but it was a good experience.
Christopher was hesitant to, as he said, name plug the podcast he worked for remotely while in Vancouver. But if there's one thing I've learned about art podcast listeners while working on this project, it's that they're always looking for more art podcasts to listen to. If you find yourself in this category of listener, check out the Conversation Art Podcast, hosted by Michael Shaw. After a year in Vancouver, Christopher and Helena relocated to Southern California.
So I'm a preparations assistant at that art museum in LA. And I've been doing that since about July of last year. I worked as kind of a visitor service assistant at the same museum fairly soon after I arrived, or I moved to Long Beach. And basically what I do is it's kind of like a preparator, or sometimes it's called a art handler person, is, the people in the museum that are responsible for installing and maintaining all the exhibits, and moving and all the artwork around. So my job mostly is I'm one of the first people in the museum, so I kind of set up the museum for the day. So that means cleaning everything up in the galleries and in the art around the artwork, painting things that need to be painting, if there's some sort of chip in the wall or mark or something like that, getting rid of that, switching out light bulbs, all the little kind of mundane things. Or if there's problems with lighting or any of the TBM, which was time-based media. So if any of the video exhibits or anything isn't working, or something isn't lighting up, something isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, I fix that too. And then the rest of the day after the museum opens is usually, maybe I'll be moving crates around into the museum or out of the museum, helping it put it on the back of a truck, helping prepare for an upcoming show. So that could be anything really, helping build gallery furniture for, something like a pedestal or display case. This week I was working on a kind of more technical thing of putting together a slideshow for an exhibit that's going to be sort of like a historical exhibit. So we need like a slideshow of archival footage. So I've been putting that together. I kind of have that background of, working with projectors, working with Photoshop and digital images a lot. So I have that background. So
right, I see. So that maybe comes more from them kind of tapping into your unique.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Getting a job in an art museum versus something completely related to art, is that strategic for you? Is that intentional? Is that something you want your day job to be, art related?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say strategic. It's just something. It's what I know, and it's what I enjoy working around. So, and I think that's pretty much all. I'm kind of lucky. Pretty much all my professional adult working life has either been working at an art school as like a teacher or as a staff member, or working in an art museum.
Yeah. Well, do you feel like there's any crossover? Like, does it kind of influence your creative practice at all? Or even, and again, this can be kind of off the record if necessary, but I'm like, are you able to use the tools there for your own work?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be off the record. I think I know, like a lot of times with wood projects or something like that, if there's scrap or something like that, if I think it's big enough for me or for Helena to paint something on, I'll grab it. And
that's an added benefit.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, I also do get, it can be inspiring to see the work we're dealing with and up close. And when I was teaching, it was always really inspiring working with the students, to see their to just be in a room with 25 to 30 people, and they're all have different viewpoints and different ways of approaching a problem. And I mean, that was very stimulating.
I think a lot of us, when we get out of school, we try to integrate work we do for pay with our creative work. And that's right. Very difficult to do. But if we can integrate it with that third bucket, which it seems like you've done in a few different ways.
Yeah. The other thing I should mention too, working with art handlers and preparators and stuff like that, a lot of them are also artists too. So you kind of plugging into a community that way. So they're all artists. They all have connections to some place or another. Mm-hmm. I think with LA, it's there's a certain stratification going on. There's the thing. There's the LA art community that everybody knows about. The very kind of blue chip galleries and museums. But then there's a lot of different spaces, and actually probably where a lot more interesting work is being shown, that you have to know somebody to know somebody to get even know where it is.
Right. Exactly. Do you feel that you get plugged into that side of the art community a little bit more with this?
Yes, definitely. You just hear about a lot of different things going on through the people you work with. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And especially for me, and somebody I'm so new here, I don't know anybody or anything. So everything's news to me.
No, that's interesting, because I think one thing that's come up a bit throughout the course of this project is, I've talked to some people, and I think most of the people I've talked to from museum school have kind of since dispersed. And then some people in the Bay Area came here for grad school and stayed. And so it's interesting to talk to you as someone who is kind of newish, I guess, in an art community. And this is maybe one good way to kind of plug into that community is through maybe initially through the work that you're doing for pay versus really trying to just get your creative work out there in the world.
Right. I mean, I was pretty lucky. I started showing out here pretty, kind of right off the bat when I got here, even before I started working. But it was responding to cold calls, open calls and stuff like that. And it was kind of lonely going to these openings. And I was I don't know anyone here. But I mean, the good thing is that it's open enough that I could participate, that it wasn't as like hermetically sealed.
Yeah. Well, do you want to skip ahead a little bit, actually? Because one of my questions moving on is talking about showing your work. So it sounds like maybe that happened before you had a job. So maybe you had more time to submit your work to exhibitions and that kind of thing. But can you talk about that period a little bit? And then has that changed as you've gotten busier with your paid work?
A couple of things happened along the way. So while I was doing the other job at the museum, I had more time to submit to open calls. Like Helen and I both decided to, like, at some point we would go get our teaching credential, which would give us the opportunity to teach K through 12 art in high schools. But we were pursuing that, and yeah, that kind of like took all my time. So I was working at the museum and then like going to school full time, and I didn't really have much time to make my own work. But the weird perversion of it, you would have to make work for the single subject teaching credential, but it was so basically you had to do you had to make a version of the project that you would assign like an 8th grader. So that was like the artwork I was making, like make something out of this cigar box, make a clay whistle.
Yeah. So were you when you were submitting your work, when you first moved to LA, was it older, not like old work, but it was work that you already had done? You weren't necessarily.
It was work that I had already done, but then there were some new pieces I was able to make along the way.
So it seems like what you're saying is you didn't necessarily have more time because you were doing, even though it sounds like you were maybe working less, you were also a student when you first got there. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of So only after kind of putting the single subject teaching credential pursuit on hold for a while have I been able to get back into making new work. That weird phase where you're still like, I'm trying to do something new, and it's in that self-conscious phase where you're trying to figure out what it's going to be and like not ready to share it with public yet.
Right.
I don't want to show anything that I'm making right now. So for a while until I figure it out for myself, because nothing's worse than trying to explain something you haven't had time to think about to somebody.
Right. I also feel like that kind of creative brainstorming, like the beginning of a project, is more time consuming. Like I feel like once I get to the production stage of a project, especially if I'm doing multiples, that I can crank out in 15 minutes here, an hour there. But I think what you're describing is like the thing that has come up time and again over these interviews as being actually the challenging part about juggling work with your studio practice and everything else, is that it's harder, as you get further away from grad school, to find those big chunks of time that you need for that like creative brainstorming and kind of figuring out what it means and what you're going for.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just harder to work through, I think when you're in school, there's always the looming deadline or the looming visit from some advisor or something like that over your head that you have to have something new to show them, that you'll produce something to talk about. Now, I don't know if that's beneficial or not. I don't know, that imposing that type of structure, I think, is beneficial for younger artists in a way, but as you're trying to make mature work or something that you really want to be like important to yourself, and I don't know, I'm finding that those type of deadlines and structures are less important. The work will get done when it gets done. So the only thing is you have to just keep working at it, and it'll be ready when it's ready. It's not at least for me at this stage in my career.
So backing up a bit, you have sort of a non-traditional work schedule, I guess. So can you talk a little bit, just describe kind of a typical work day? When do you work? Do you work on your own studio practice on the days that you work, or do you save that for your days off? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So I usually out of the house probably around 5:00 in the morning, and, don't come back until probably like 5 p.m. There's a long commute. Yeah. And it's longer because I take the public transportation, which is, it's nice because my job pays for it. So that's why it's a little bit longer than if I just drove in. Some of the traffic jams coming back during rush hour are kind of gnarly. So maybe it would take me longer to get back home.
Right. And I'm wondering, are you able to use that time to read or listen to music or podcasts or anything like that?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I actually listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm working, but I do a lot of reading, and that is also like a time where I have like another mini notebook and a mini sketchbook on me that I'll jot something down. If I have an idea about something, a way something should look, or something that I think is important, I'll jot that down on the commute to, take a little bit of time to myself, and then I'll usually, like at some point during the day, the night or something like that, grab a sketchbook and jot something down on those really busy days. On days off, I'll do a little bit more than that in the studio. Right now, Helena and I are in the midst of like creating a proper studio space in our garage. So that's productive time too, putting effort into that. So we have something a little bit more like half set up and left alone for just that one purpose. So we're kind of in the middle of that. But on my days off, like today, I'll do something more. Now that could be like finished drawings, or maybe something. I've been toying with video work, so it might be editing something or working with something like that. Yeah.
So you talked about your job kind of allowing you to plug into the art community in a unique way that you might not be able to if you worked elsewhere. Can you talk a little bit more about the community you've been there for? So you guys will be there 2 years this summer. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Like when you say you plug into that community, what does that look like for you outside of your job?
It's usually like try to do some gallery days every like month or two. Just visit a bunch of galleries. I do have a couple of friends out here. We'll hook up with some friends and we'll go check out a few shows. If a friend of mine is in a show, I'll make an effort to try to get there to say hi and like just show some support. With my hours though, some days I do get a little lazy and just decide to go home and go to sleep.
Yeah, I can imagine if my day started that early, I don't think I'd want to hang out afterward to go to a show.
If it's a friend, if there's a friend and they have something happening, I'll make the effort. But there's also that weird limbo time where I'll be off work, but the opening doesn't happen for another like couple hours, and that's the hard time. That's the like, what do I do? I'm tired. I'm hungry.
Yeah, you need somewhere to go take a nap. What about? I'm curious for you too. If some of that community is satisfied, like on the job, like do you like while you're at work, not only are you surrounded by art, but you're surrounded by a lot of other artists. It sounds like do you feel like that creative community need maybe is satisfied a little bit by your time spent at work?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think that community thing kind of happens there too, organically. And like we all know each other pretty well now. People talk about their kids and what they're working on in the studio. So
let's talk about social media a little bit. It's interesting. The social media conversation has taken some interesting turns in this project where on the one hand, like I kind of approached it as like, oh my gosh, here's this extra thing. Like, how do people do this when you have such limited time? And it's just very interesting how different people approach it. And of course, it gets into all sorts of other stuff. And I feel like probably the most consistent thing that has come up is Instagram. I feel like it's like kind of not as political. It's not as many words. Right. There's not as much sharing going on. It's more kind of like putting your stuff out in the world and like connect. And I feel like some interesting connections have come up that way potentially. So how do you, what is your strategy around social media? Kind of in general, I mean, again, I think initially my question was, considering you have such limited studio time to make work, do you feel the pressure to be showing it there? Is it an extension of community? Like, how does it work for you?
Prior to this this creative period where I'm like kind of working through new stuff, I think I had a pretty traditional approach to it. I mean, I was on Facebook and Instagram. I don't think I was on anything else. I've never done Twitter. I handle a Twitter account for a job, but that wasn't me. Facebook was a way to like just it was a way to like promote shows or like that, because I was co-running an artist space. It was really helpful to promote our shows on Facebook there, and it was one of the ways we could promote our shows. But I'm off of Facebook now. There's nothing about me waking up at like 3:30 in the morning to go to work,
right.
waiting in the rain for a bus.
It really is a curated view.
Yeah, you know.
Life,
so
sure.
it's kind of a way of plugging into another community in some way, you know, especially for you, like doing a project like this, where it is, you know, going to probably the audience for it is going to expand largely kind of like word of mouth and like somebody seeing something and like passing it on. And this type of like a social media presence can definitely help. But I don't know. Part of me wonders like later generations are going to look back at Facebook as like the way like my generation looked at people taking up smoking, you know? So
just don't start. It's so hard to stop. Like, don't start.
Yeah. You know, like I would look at my parents like smoking a pack a day. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? like, you know, that's going to kill you. Right. I think if I were back in the classroom now, I would probably just tell my students or like if you find yourself interacting with this thing and it's making you feel bad, you can just turn it off.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And I think that that's something that's come up quite a bit for me in this project is the just giving yourself permission to not feel like you have to cram all of these things into your week all the time.
Yeah.
So we've talked about giving yourself permission to take a break from social media, but what about taking a break from your creative practice altogether?
I've often had that anxiety about like, oh, I should be producing something. I should be producing something. I should be making something, you know? So yeah, I think taking a break, I know a few years ago that I had to do that, you know, and it was, I think in the long run, it was pretty beneficial. Like I was like, okay, you know, and I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but sometimes the work itself leads to, like if you're making work that you're not really that, or you feel more, not that you're not that excited about, or maybe it's run its course, but you're still making it, you know, like, because this is the thing you do. I found that at one point, like I think that was probably like maybe a cause of one of the contributing factors to a minor bout of depression. So it was like a signal to move on, and like taking a break was a way of starting over and starting a new body of work that was pretty interesting.
I'm interested in like, if there are any other ways that your day job kind of influences or feeds into your creative practice or vice versa, other than financially.
I mean, yes. I mean, I think we already mentioned the community thing, and then also just being surrounded by artwork all day, that contributes. Also, there's like technical things I'm doing, technical know-how, exposure to different materials and stuff like that kind of helps me in the studio practice. So learning about a different type of wood or like plastic or something like that and a different way to use it. So like that's pretty straightforward. I mean, I don't think I can ask for anything more than that.
Would you quit your day job if you could?
Geez, I don't know. Definitely take a break, like a nice vacation. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of fun. Probably not, but probably I would take like a month off. I don't know if my job would be waiting for me when I got back, but I guess I'm so rich, I don't care.
Exactly. In this dream scenario. I think, I'm always curious to hear if people are kind of looking to either transition to a different job and have 3 months in between, or apply to a residency where you'd have 2 weeks to kind of get back to that like grad school art camp kind of model and just make work. Like, is that something you aspire to try and figure out how to fit in, even if it's a long weekend or a month, like you say, or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is. I mean, I'll tell you this, though. I mean, if I were teaching at college, I mean, unless it was like some sort of nightmare scenario, I would definitely not quit. it's, to me, that's always fun, and the breaks that you usually get when you're teaching, like the summer off or something like that, is sufficient. I just think that's fun. I like the work I'm doing now. If you're an artist and you have a job, I think this is probably one of the better ones to have. I mean, this or teaching are like kind of like the ideal gigs.
More information about Christopher can be found at artisanoffices.com. On the next episode of the podcast, I speak with Gabriel Martinez, a Berkeley-based visual designer who works by day as a design assistant in the field of creative book publishing. Artists and Offices is produced and edited by me, Rebecca Bird Grigsby. Intro music is provided by Mr. Neat Beats. Show notes and additional episodes can be found at artisanoffices.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast on iTunes and leave the show a rating or review. This will help the podcast connect with even more artists and offices. Thank you so much for listening.
It shouldn't be so much of a hustle, though. There should be more opportunities for artists. There should be more support. There should be like a better safety net for everybody in this country to begin with.